You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
These are the highlights of the world today, Monday, 18th of February 2013. Sandhurst Mons Hall renamed King Hamad Hall. Tower Hamlets' new young mayor tweets threats of violence. Blyton festival in racism row. The Last Supper, Germany's great church sell-off. How Europe bankrolls terror. How Islamism tainted France's presidential election. Chinese pig farms breed drug-resistant bacteria. Elementary school offers tutoring, unless you're white. Sexual violence in Egypt takes on political dimension. Thought for the day, the patter of tiny hooves. And finally, dog dials 999 to save self. UK. Sandhurst Mons Hall renamed King Hamad Hall. Mons Hall at Royal Military Academy Sandhurst will be renamed King Hamad Hall after King of Bahrain's £3 million donation to assist with refurbishment. Politicians, soldiers and families of those who fell at Mons in the First World War are appalled at the betrayal of the heroes sacrificed for filthy lucre from a despot who is buying support in the hope of avoiding his own Arab Spring. Well, he need not worry, our government will ensure he's safe as long as the oil keeps flowing. In a similar story, the United Arab Emirates helps Joplin, Missouri in the USA think big in rebuilding tornado-scarred schools. 2 weeks after a mile-wide tornado tore through his city, killing 161 people and rendering a landscape of terrible devastation, the public school system here received a telephone call from a man working for the United Arab Emirates Embassy in Washington. "Tell me what you need," the embassy staffer said. The United Arab Emirates has donated $5 million for a neonatal intensive care unit and $1 million for high school laptops in the tornado-devastated Missouri town. The USA has in recent years been the recipient of many hundreds of millions of dollars of foreign aid from the oil-rich Middle Eastern states and emerging economic powerhouses of India and China. Following Hurricane Katrina, the UAE and Qatar, a fellow petro-wealth Persian Gulf nation, both wrote $100 million cheques to the State Department in 2005 to help with the reconstruction of the US Gulf Coast. A World at 8 writer comments, "I just wonder when the Royal in Royal Military Academy will refer to a Middle Eastern potentate rather than our own crown. All this while we in Britain were beggaring our country and still sending foreign aid to many of these countries." Tower Hamlets' new mayor tweets threats of violence. The newly elected young mayor of Tower Hamlets posted a threat of violence on Twitter last week, just days after being unveiled in his new role. Mahdi Alam, who campaigned on a pledge to tackle youth crime and violence, took to the social networking site recently to launch an unexplained tirade visible to all of his followers. The tweets, which were later deleted, said, "Even if you beat me up, I'll still be young mayor, so what do you achieve? To be frank, you'll always be the loser, as my boys will pretty much kill you, pa." Mahdi, who attends Stepney Green School, was unveiled as the winner of the young mayoral election at the town hall ceremony on January the 31st. Blyton festival in racism row. Enid Blyton painted an idyllic view of rural England in many of her books. Beaconsfield, Buckinghamshire is embroiled in controversy as organisers of a festival to honour and celebrate her life clash with locals who claim Blyton's work are racist and offensive. Most of Blyton's works were updated over to the political correct language required of today's publications. The charm of her writings has been lost to the fascist agenda of the politically correct bias of the left. State-funded jihad seekers allowance. Controversial hate preacher Anjem Choudary, who is claiming £25,000 a year in benefits, is urging his followers to also sponge off UK taxpayers by claiming their jihad seekers allowance. Anjem Choudary, who in the past has planned to disrupt the minute's silence on Remembrance Sunday, also openly mocked hard-working Britons, calling them slaves. The Sun newspaper secretly filmed him saying Islam will overrun Europe, David Cameron and Barack Obama should be killed, and calling the Queen ugly. The father of 4 takes home more than £25,000 a year in benefits and lives in a £320,000 house in Leytonstone, East London. He had told a crowd of around 30 fanatics, "People will say, but you are not working, but the normal situation is for you to take money from the kafir, non-Muslim." A World Date writer comments, "This man is still walking the streets after calling for the Prime Minister's death. I guess freedom of religion trumps right to life, even for a puppet Prime Minister." European news. The Last Supper, Germany's great church sell-off. Dwindling church attendances and dire financial straits are forcing the Catholic and Protestant churches in Germany to sell off church buildings en masse. Some are demolished while others are turned into restaurants or indoor rock climbing centres. A number are under consideration for conversion to mosques. How Europe bankrolls terror. When northern Mali fell to terrorists and foreign militants last April, a debate began over the causes of the country's chaotic collapse. Many argued that it was a direct byproduct of NATO's 2011 intervention in Libya, which sent thousands of well-armed men across the Sahara to Mali. Others pointed to Mali's internal corruption and ethnic divisions. But little was said about the most important factor. Europeans have knowingly bankrolled Islamist radicals with ransom payments since at least 2003. Over the past decade, Britain, Germany, Italy, France, Spain, Austria, Sweden and the Netherlands have paid more than $130 million to terrorist groups, mostly through mediators, to free European hostages. Nasser Wadadi, writing for the New York Times, says, "France's recent military operation in Mali would not have been necessary if there had been a coherent European policy that involved targeted operations against terrorist networks. Even today, with French and African troops on the ground in Mali, there has been shockingly little help from other European governments. Most of Europe has avoided responsibility for preventing the emergence of a new terrorist hotspot virtually on its doorstep." By contrast, the American government seems to grasp the seriousness of the problem and has gone to great lengths to stop it. The Treasury Department's Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence went to Europe last October, seeking to prevent any future ransom payments to AQIM and a related group Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. But the ransom problem is not ultimately America's responsibility. Europe's leaders must slay the monster they helped to create. How Islamism tainted France's presidential election. Nidra Poller, writing for the Middle East Quarterly, asks, what is Europe going to do about Islam? Submit, resist, or just wait it out dim-wittedly? The recent French presidential election offers insight into the way Islam, or more exactly the Islamic factor, may eventually play out in European politics. Despite attempts by the left to focus the debate on the economic crisis, Islam played a decisive role in the contest. The socialist candidate, whose platform was tilted to favour the party's Muslim clientele, could not have won without total support in the second round of voting from the far left parties marked by zealous anti-Zionism and a full range of anti-Western ideologies. The question of Islam in France was raised with an unprecedented candour by incumbent Nicolas Sarkozy of the Movement for a Popular Majority. For the first time in France, a major party clearly advocated a push back against Islam, qualified of course with the adjective radical. This strategy fired up the enthusiasm of the base, mobilised voters, brought tens of thousands to party rallies and led to a daily increase in Sarkozy's polling figures. It would be fair to estimate that if he had had one more week to campaign, he might have defeated Hollande during the second round of the vote in May 6, 2012. World news. Chinese pig farms breed drug-resistant bacteria. Half of all pigs live in China and well over half of them eat feed laced with antibiotic growth promoters. Now, Chinese and US researchers have found that this practice is spawning a tide of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Animals in crowded feedlots are constantly exposed to bacterial infections, so producers put low doses of antibiotics into their feed. The measure may boost profits, but it also favours the survival of bacteria with genes that help them resist the antibiotics. Antibiotic-resistant genes, ARGs, can migrate between bacteria, creating superbugs that are hard to or impossible to treat and that can infect people. The European Union banned antibiotic growth promoters for this reason in 2006. But they are still permitted in the US, where recently released figures show around half of all the samples of the food poisoning bacterium Salmonella taken from retail poultry meat are resistant to at least 3 antibiotics. The impact of antibiotic growth promoters in China, where industrial pig production is expanding, has been unclear. China is the biggest antibiotics producer and consumer in the world and feeds nearly half of its production to animals. Elementary school offers tutoring, unless you're white. Wow! As we strive for a truly colourblind society, it's quite apparent that the ones who hold us back are the ones who scream the loudest about equality. Those on the left blast those on the right because we just want to recognise people for what they do, not what skin colour they have. But just like Barack Obama plays the race card over and over again, we have another example to point to. This time it's an elementary school in Denver that offers a tutoring programme, unless you are white. As reported by Denver TV Channel 4, the tutoring programme at Mission Viejo Elementary in Aurora has come under fire because it was not designed, nor did it welcome, all kids. If your child was white and needed tutoring, you're out of luck. Sexual violence in Egypt takes on political dimension. Thousands of protesters took to the streets of Cairo last week demanding an end to endemic sexual violence in the country, following comments by one lawmaker that women victims of sexual assaults in Tahrir Square were 100% responsible. Protesters took to the streets of Cairo and in capitals around the world on demanding an end to endemic sexual aggression in Egypt that is taking on an increasingly political dimension. The rally was the latest in a series of actions to protest against a culture of impunity and follows harrowing reports of multiple sexual attacks, including one particularly savage rape in and around Tahrir Square on the January 25th second anniversary of the Egyptian Revolution. The demonstrators were spurred on by comments by Egyptian lawmakers which suggested that women were to blame for sexual attacks against them simply for being on the streets at night. Women know they are amongst thugs when demonstrating in Tahrir Square, said Adal Afifi, a member of the ultra-conservative Asala party. By getting herself involved in such circumstances, the woman bears 100% responsibility. Christian pastor beheaded by Muslim youth. A group of Muslim youths assaulted several Christians using sticks and machetes and attacked a butchery owner at the Busasiri town, Tanzania. During the confrontations, Pastor Chachili of the Tanzania Assemblies of God Church at Busasiri was beheaded during religious-linked conflicts at the town in Geita region. The spokesperson for the Geita Regional Police Commander's officer, Mr Dennis Stefano, identified the deceased pastor as Matteo Chachili. He said conflicts have been boiling for a while now in the area where a section of what are believed to be Muslim leaders had demanded immediate closure of butcheries owned by Christians. Foreigners arrested for trying to spread Christianity in Libya. 4 foreigners have been arrested in the eastern Libyan town of Benghazi on suspicion of being Christian missionaries and printing books about Christianity, a security official said on Saturday. They were arrested on Tuesday at a publishing house where they were printing thousands of books that called for conversion to Christianity, security official Hussein bin Hamid said. Proselytizing is forbidden in Libya. We are a 100% Muslim country and this kind of action affects our national security. A World Hijab reporter comments, well, at least the Libyans recognise the danger of foreign religions in their country. It's too bad the people and governments of Great Britain are too blind to see the dangers of Islam. After all, the Libyan government must be right. Our misguided and dangerous politicians helped to put it in place. Thought for the day, a patter of tiny hooves. Now I bet you thought I was going to talk about the horse meat fiasco, didn't you? Well, although the title of today's thought might be a trifle misleading, it is the last of my talks on the way our culture and the British way of doing things has been ruined, and today it concerns our children and our youth. Now we Brits have never been known for loving babies and children. Well, thankfully not in the way that our sexual perverts do, but also not in the way our neighbours on the continent seem to. On my many trips to Spain some years ago, you couldn't go anywhere at night for a meal without hordes of very well behaved Spanish children and babes in arms sitting there eating their food with the adults. In fact, the only kids rushing around yelling were the badly brought up Brit kids, while their parents made everyone else pay the price of having brought their brats with them in their 2 weeks' worth of hell in Spain. And I'm including the Spanish here as well. Nowadays the Brits are better known for their gluttony and their drunkenness than the behaviour of their kids, and if I hear one more Brit throwing herself off a balcony in a drunken stupor, I'll throw myself out of the window. But therein lies the truism, because discipline has gone. Standards and benchmarks have gone with it, leaving a rudderless ship, that of the average Brit family unit. Now I'm not talking about the hard-working and good family units who actually bring up their children, of which there are many. I'm however talking about the sheeples. Those poor souls at the beck and call of both the government and media, diversity and multiculturalism. All these things have affected our children and the relationship between parents and children. I believe our continental brothers and sisters still believe in the family unit of father, mother and then children. They still have discipline in most of these homes, tough love though it may be, and most fathers do not vanish into the woodwork. In the days when the British were accused of having stiff upper lips and intimate details of one life were not plastered over the news, children were often brought up in a regime of care. Feed 4 times a day, changing times whenever, cuddle times and rest times, and that love of mine particularly early bedtimes for the little darlings. Now my generation were for the most part brought up that way, my children were brought up that way, and so it goes on. Now the other way of bringing up kids is any time, anywhere, any place. I've no quarrel with this. If it suits you, do it, although on a personal level it would have driven me mad. But we have to remember that prior to the good old days we sent very young children into factories, the poorhouse, up chimneys, and deported or hung them for stealing when they were hungry. These things I believe went on in Western Europe as well. Do you remember the little match girl? I cried for days over that one. So history is not kind to us Christian white people, with that and of course in our early history the fact that even before written history and the coming of Christianity into these isles, at Samhain we sacrificed them as well. It's also well known that when a tribe conquered tribe the children were killed first, the women later to prevent any descendants of that tribe. Foreign cultures, of which we have the most representatives over here now in our culturally mishmash country, is or was certainly no kinder to children either. India have had their child beggars for centuries. These can sometimes be the normally physically sound-born children of the poor who have their limbs broken deliberately so they can beg. Child rape and marriage are commonplace, as were and are now. Also sweatshop labour, which in the past was working in the fields or whatever a small person could do. In China, girl babies were left out to die and counted as expendable in that culture, and many Middle Eastern cultures. In Africa, even today, babies and children are subjected to torture and death to appease certain gods or diseases, the current attacks on albinos being just the latest in a long line of voodoo or similar cults which condone murder. So we have a strange diversity here. We have an untutored and unmanageable couple of generations in this country, whose parents, if lucky, pay over the odds for trainers made in China or the Philippines for schoolwear, and yet will not pay out for extra tuition. We have parents who allow their young daughters free rein in mobile phones and computers, and yet complain when they arrange to meet a pervert. We have parents who yell loudly about their babies being run over, run off with or raped, when they've left them to go out alone at night when they've been going to the pub. We have sets of parents who have not been brought up themselves correctly, or even at all, throwing all the blame on schools for their children's lack of education. Well guys, education, rules and standards start, begin and end at home. And we Brits are so busy adopting and adapting to what are, in a sense, foreign cultures and authorities that we have lost our way. In a very odd turnabout, we Brits are welcoming strangers into our midst who have for the most part a worse history of child abuse and neglect than we do, and that's pushing it. We're the only country in the Western Hemisphere that needs a society to protect our children from abuse. Not from outsiders, but from often within the family. We as a nation now get almost hysterical over past young deaths. Remember Hillsborough? We get obsessed to the point of madness over a young woman whose death, although tragic, was hardly worth the sentimental outpouring that occurred, especially in the light of the Mail the day before Di died, telling the world what an unfit mother she was, leaving her boys behind as she cavorted around Europe with an Arab guy, rather the latest in the line of rather exotic men friends. Why aren't the Brits more sentimental over their own? We all went for broke over the Stephen Lawrence murder, when in truth he was not the shining light of sainthood any more or less than any other young black guy in this country. A poor little black kid was knifed to death by youths of mixed race in a tower block, and the police actually went out and caught them. If this little guy had been white, it would still be unsolved, which shows how the public are really very two-faced over the question of what does whom for what and who gets to pay the price. You could put it down to reverse racism, which is endemic in the police and any other authorities who are subjected to the diversity and multicultural propaganda. This means if a black or Asian child is mistreated, left to starve, carved up for a tribal feast, raped, tortured or killed, you can bet your bottom dollar the police, quite rightly, are hot to trot, even though those perpetrators are non-white. Now if the same acts are perpetrated on a small white child by a white person, if they are discovered in time, which often they're not, the police will publicise their picture and name to shame, rightly. But if a black or Asian person perpetrates vile acts on a white child or underage girl, the police always hesitate to either arrest them, question them, name them or give any details out until in some cases they are actually prosecuted, if indeed they are. More cases along those lines hit the headlines the minute they're found and then seem to dribble away with time until they are no more. What happens to those victims? There is a media blackout on us nationalists, well known, but is there also a blackout on black on white crime reporting? It would seem so. One of our best leaflets in the British National Party was that racism goes both ways, and it does, especially if you're living in what once was a white Christian country and were born to expect that stand of honesty over crimes involving young children or girls. For the most part, our children are not made the most out of in what was once our society today. We have overeducated, accommodated and paid for thousands, if not millions, of foreign children in our midst to become professional working adults, knowing that these adults will never give our white children the same start they had in a new and welcoming country. Their parents will only employ family. Their restaurants will only employ their own language speakers. Their houses will be built, extended or got by fair means or most often foul by their own people. Their money will stay in their communities and they will continue, by virtue of the great British public, to rise in power and influence. Why? Because we Brits do not look after our own. We should stop promoting this country as an educational centre for the unwanted of this world or the people who have messed up their own countries so badly they need to leave. We must start promoting and applying standards before it's too late to our own youth. It is not fashionable to dress and walk like a nignog. You can live without a mobile. You can survive without useless foreign crap to wear. The computer should be used for work and study, not getting mixed up with perverts and idiots. Your teachers should have the right to belt you if you're rude, as should your parents. I'm not talking child abuse here, my friends, or the cane, just a wallop round the legs. If you're living at home, abide by those rules, if there are any. Do not go out late at night and please try not to get drunk all the time. Although I loathe Lumley and her Gurkha phase, she did have a point about young girls and drinking. Although pass the bolly should not be the catchword there, I feel. And remember, even if you do not do politics and think us nationalists are a lot of racist bastards, remember to notice the next time your Asian, Chinese or Muslim friends are near. They don't really do any of the above. They're busy keeping fit, working, learning and doing their exams. They do not cheat their parents and they respect their elders. That is what our successive governments want them to do. They don't care about how many boys you've been with, how many abortions you have had or will have, how much money some Muslim lad has made from his friends with you, how much money you have spent on buying foreign crap and wearing it, drinking so much you'll either kill yourself or become infertile, hating your parent or parents and all the misery that'll come your way with being uneducated and uneducatable, and the sort of job you'll never get that you see on TV and in the cheap magazines. And we have let this happen to our youth and babies. We have allowed the education system, the further education system and authorities take our children and bend them into what they want them to be. That is no contest for the newcomers at all, either work-wise or living-wise. Already we have a generation of youngsters who will never own their own house or even get on the first rung of the ladder. Thus you can forget producing more Indigenous babies from that equation. Mixed partnerships are being hailed on the TV and soaps. When did you last see a black man and a black woman in an advert? As a direct insult to young white guys, a gorgeous girl is often partnered by a young black guy. An Asian girl is often partnered by a mixed race guy. This sends out the message that young white guys are uncool. Of course, if you're a homosexual or lesbian, that is really cool now, and this lifestyle is being shamelessly promoted to the very young in schools. Put that with the fact that a young white guy will never own a house, get a job or make babies, and there you have the problem as we nationalists have with this mantra. It is a wicked mantra. Couple it with the anti-male, pro-same partnership brigade and the give everything to the Muslims or blacks or whatever hordes, and you have a gentle genocidal message being sent out every day of every month of every year within the UK to your children and to your grandchildren. In fact, in some ways we haven't moved forward in the child cruelty line from hundreds of years ago. We've just imported millions of people to do it for us. Our children are in a different sort of danger now than before, but just as deliberate and vicious as the slavery of old. In those days it was not brainwashing that destroyed them, but hunger and lack of social help. Nowadays it's taken another, more ambivalent form of abuse. That of entire generations of young white males who think they don't count, and an entire generation of drunken and abused young girls who think the way of Islam is better than what they have. Put this with so-called liberalists and the multicultural is better ethos from the thinkers and you have a dangerous swerve in society that will only benefit one section of our society. That section are the Muslims and their own progeny, never ever our progeny. It is up to us to reinvent rules and some sort of moral code without being heavy-handed or stupid about it. Our youth is the future of our country, and despite what is happening now, I truly believe they are worth saving and worth promoting. We need to get these good youngsters who are not afraid of the liberal bark or the Marxist bite to join the YBMP and prove that I'm not wrong. There is light at the end of this tunnel. There must be. The alternative is the death of England and the English. And finally, dog dials 999 to save self. The Sun is reporting a 2-year-old basset hound named George saved his life by dialling 999 as he choked on a telephone cord. George knocked over a heavy-duty, old-fashioned phone in owner Steve Brown's home. He became entangled in the cord and wound up with it wrapped round his neck. Somehow George, in the midst of choking, managed to dial 999 with his paw. The emergency operator heard the heavy breathing and gasping on the other end and alerted the authorities, who entered the house with the help of a neighbour, Paul Walker, who had a key. Walker saw the dog choking and ripped the cord free from the phone to save him. He told the Sun, incredibly you could see where his paw print was on the phone to ring 999. He literally saved his own life. Lydia Brown, the daughter of George's owner, expressed equal amazement at the basset's life-saving feat, telling the Sun he's really dopey and just likes to chew socks. This presenter says George isn't sounding quite so dopey now though. You've been listening to The World at 8. I'm Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night. Drug-resistant bacteria. Elementary school offers tutoring, unless you're white. Sexual violence in Egypt takes on political dimension. Thought for the day, the patter of tiny hooves. And finally, dog dials 999 to save self. UK. Sandhurst Mons Hall renamed King Hamad Hall. Mons Hall at Royal Military Academy Sandhurst will be renamed King Hamad Hall after King of Bahrain's £3 million donation to assist with refurbishment. Politicians, soldiers and families of those who fell at Mons in the First World War are appalled at the betrayal of the heroes sacrificed for filthy lucre from a despot who is buying support in the hope of avoiding his own Arab Spring. Well, he need not worry, our government will ensure he's...
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
These are the highlights of the world today, Monday, 18th of February 2013. Sandhurst Mons Hall renamed King Hamad Hall. Tower Hamlet's new young mayor tweets threats of violence. Blyton Festival in racism row. The Last Supper, Germany's great church sell-off. How Europe bankrolls terror. How Islamism tainted France's presidential election. Chinese pig farms breed in China. Following Hurricane Katrina, the UAE and Qatar, a fellow petro-wealth Persian Gulf nation, both wrote $100 million cheques to the State Department in 2005 to help with the reconstruction of the US Gulf Coast. A World Date writer comments, "I just wonder when the Royal Military Academy will refer to a Middle Eastern potentate rather than our own crown. All this while we in Britain were beggaring our country and still sending foreign aid to many of these countries." Tower Hamlets' new mayor tweets threats of violence. The newly elected young mayor of Tower Hamlets posted a threat of violence on Twitter last week, just days after being unveiled in his new role. Mahdi Alam, who campaigned on a pledge to tackle youth crime and violence, took to the social networking site recently to launch an unexplained tirade visible to all of his followers. The tweets, which were later deleted, said, "Even if you beat me up, I'll still be young mayor, so what do you achieve? To be frank, you'll always be the loser, as my boys will pretty much kill you, pa." Mahdi, who attends Stepney Green School, was unveiled as the winner of the young mayoral election at the town hall ceremony on January the 31st. Blyton Festival in Racism Row. Enid Blyton painted an idyllic view of rural England in many of her books. Beaconsfield, Buckinghamshire is embroiled in controversy as organisers of a festival to honour and celebrate her life clash with locals who claim Blyton's work are racist and offensive. Most of Blyton's works were updated over to safe as long as the oil keeps flowing. In a similar story, the United Arab Emirates helps Joplin, Missouri in the USA think big in rebuilding tornado-scarred schools. 2 weeks after a mile-wide tornado tore through his city, killing 161 people and rendering a landscape of terrible devastation, the public school system here received a telephone call from a man working for the United Arab Emirates Embassy in Washington. "Tell me what you need," the embassy staffer said. The United Arab Emirates has donated $5 million for a neonatal intensive care unit and $1 million for high school laptops in the tornado-devastated Missouri town. The USA has in recent years been the recipient of many hundreds of millions of dollars of foreign aid from the oil-rich Middle Eastern states and emerging economic powerhouses of India